So let's spend some time on understanding the intuition. So we had cash flows. We had very simple cash flows. What were the cash flows? Minus 1,000 today, signifying our effort, the cost of what it took to start the project. And what was the cash flow next year? 1,320. Where do these cash flows come from? And I'll later use the following language. Who do they belong to? Please recognize one thing extremely important, and I will keep emphasizing this, but it's very important. Cash flows belong to the project, to your idea. You are responsible as the person generating this idea to come up with the costs and benefits. Because if you can't do it, then the idea is not very obvious to anybody. So this is the first step in recognizing what are the costs and benefits of your own idea. Now, it's not easy to do. It involves accounting, it involves finance, and so on. So I'll spend an entire session next time on how do you come up with these. But I must warn you, that's the one part of this class that I cannot spend a lot of time on, because it will require you to do a class in accounting. Remember, the language that we use is accounting. We'll use if you don't understand accounting, we cannot take business plans and convert them into cash flows. But don't worry, it's not that difficult. I'll introduce you to enough thought so that you can do some basic stuff yourself. So what are cash flows and come from? The most important point is think of them as profits, not revenues, not costs of doing something, profits, right? What is left in the end. Those we call cash flows, and they occur at various points in time. In this case, 1,320 in the future, and the cash outflow today is minus 1,000. The key point, however, is it's your idea's signature. It's unique to your idea. So the idea and cash flows to me are the same thing. Idea and benefit and costs are the same thing. Because if you can't combine the two, an idea is meaningless. Okay? Now, here's the important point. What is R in our problem, the interest rate? It's 10%. And this is something that's really critical to understand. So if the cash flows come from what your sense of the idea is, your ability to figure out the cash flows. And it obviously, ultimately, the cash flows also depend on the customer, whether they buy your product or not. But what I'm saying is it's your responsibility to do all the hard work to show what the cash flows and benefits of your idea are. Where does R come from? R is an extremely critical aspect of finance. R captures the opportunity cost of investing in this idea. Opportunity cost is easily said. Everybody nods their head when it's said, but it's very tough to understand. And PhDs take tests on opportunity cost. People have been working in the real world for years, and they screw up. And the reason is, it's a very easy concept to say, yes, I understand it, but it's very tough to actually figure out. So let me tell you why R is tough. You would imagine, as most of the world does, is that R comes from thin air. In fact, most of the time I'm really frustrated where people pull R out of thin air and say, it is 20%. Why? So here's something very important to understand. R comes from the next best use of even your own investment, leave alone other people's, on a similar project. So think of R as not belonging to your project. R is that return that is coming from investing in, say, a competitor. So imagine you're going on, you have a great idea, but similar ideas usually exist, right? It was the internet boom that threw us off because we had never seen things like that. But typically, your idea is not brand new. Something similar is going on. So imagine if you have the money to start your own idea. I think it would behoove you to look at existing people doing the same thing. And if they are getting a better return than you are, it doesn't make sense for you to do it, right? So it helps society to use R as the return or the possibility of making money in a similar venture with a competitor. That becomes your R. Because when you go to R, you should be thinking like the investor in you or in other people. What will an investor do? If you show me your cash flows, cost and benefits, what's the first thing that will strike me? How could I do better? But in the same type of business. Because I can't compare businesses that are making rocket engines with selling bananas. And you'll see why not. Because they are not the same thing. One is much riskier than the other. We'll get to that, okay? What does the final number mean? So what was our NPV? Our NPV was what? $200, right? What is the unit of measurement? Dollars. It is the measurement of value. I'm not saying dollars can measure all value. What I'm saying is the unit of measurement is the unit used by everybody, right? So here's the cool thing. You will add $200 or 200 million, if you may, if you want to put everything in million, in net value to you and hopefully to society by this idea, right? So the final number has a very cool meaning as well. It says how much value have you created? You've created 200 million worth of value. Why? Because you invested 1,000 and you got 1,200. You got 1,320, but when you discounted it back today by what the competitor could have done, you're making 200. Should you pursue this idea? What do you think? Answer is yes. And the reason is very straightforward. You're creating positive value, right? One caution. One caution. If you do not have the resources to do so, should you not do it? And why am I raising this caution is because there could be situations in the world where you have a great idea but don't have the resources. And what comes in to your rescue? Markets. Competitive, fair, not money lenders dressed as banks, whatever. It's fair resources available to you. Why will that happen? Because most of us don't have great ideas. I mean, it's okay not to, right? I don't come up with great ideas all the time. It's very tough to come up with great ideas. So what do? We are mostly savers in society if you have the resources, of course. And we want them to go to the people with the ideas. And the people with the ideas don't have ideas, great ideas all the time, right? So at some point, they also want their resources to go elsewhere. So if the resources are not there, then ideas are not implemented. Therefore, the importance of markets. So I'm going to assume if you have a good idea, resources will come, regardless of whether you have the resources or not. That clearly depends on the availability of a market, right? Okay. Net present value, the essence. Value is always incremental. And I'm going to emphasize this because this is extremely important. It puts everything together. To what? So let's get started. And let me ask you the following cool thing. Suppose you have $1,000 and you're going to invest it at time 0. What is the option? The option is clearly very simple. Your idea is being practiced elsewhere. So the R of 10%, as I said, is what is gotten on, say, a similar or a competitive idea that exists. So your investor, say even your dad, says, look, I have $1,000 or $1,000,000, whatever, and I can figure out how much can I make in the marketplace. The important thing is apples to apples. So if you set up a banana stall, your dad should be comparing it to a banana stall. If you set up a rocket engine machinery factory, he should compare you to something similar. Because risk, apples versus apples, oranges versus oranges. So suppose he took this money and put it in an existing business that was similar. How much would he make? Very simple. You got to calculate the future value of $1,000 1 year from now. Don't tell me you can't do it. You can. It is 1,100. Do you get it? Take 1,000, you'll get the 1,000 back plus the 10% return. So what is this? This is equal to P1 plus R. This is the first thing we did. And what is P? $1,000. Why is it negative and this positive? Because pain comes and then you get a gain. So the $1,000 grows into 1,100. This is with the existing idea. Somebody's already doing this kind of business. Obviously, sometimes you have a brand new idea and it's tough to evaluate, and that's why we screw up when new things come, because after all, we are human. So now what is your idea saying? Your idea saying is, give me the 1,000, this is your alternative, and I'll give you how much? Well, somehow you are so cool that you're able to generate 1,320 instead of 1,100. Why am I emphasizing this? And the reason is value is not created in absolute amounts. This is extremely important. Value is always created in a relative amount. So look at this. This is the same investment. So I'm not having an investment of 500,000 versus 1,000. But look at what's happening. That's why a one-period problem is so simple. How much am I creating? Yes, I'm creating 1,320. But that's not the right way of figuring out value. The right way of figuring out value is how much have I created additional to what already would have existed. So take 1,320 and subtract 1,100. How much are you left with? 220. Everybody gets this? I have been able to, with my ingenuity in a very similar business with a similar risk, able to create value of 220. By the way, this is happening all the time. Let me give you a very simple example that I'll come back to. Walmart. Is Walmart doing something that was never done before? Heck no. I mean, not to take anything away from their efforts, they don't sell something that we have never seen before. Walmart is not like Apple, which has created something new that we like. It is selling stuff that we already wanted to buy, right? But in a different way, and created value through that process. So you have 220. But when is the 220? Which year? Now look at the beauty of this. If I bring this back today, how much is it? Very simple. 220 divided by 1.1. Why? Because the interest rate is 10% and I'm discounting for 1 year. How much am I left with? 200, which is also what? NPV. This is something that is so important to recognize, that the process of discounting that we did, right? The process of discounting that we did takes care of the opportunity cost of capital. Another way to think about it is everybody else was making 0, then everything is green, right? But everybody else in this example is not making 0, they're making 10%. I hope this was useful to you, and I hope you remember that net present value is always incremental, and value creation is always incremental, because that's how life is. There's no such thing as absolute value. It's always a relative value. Okay. Let's do another example, and then I promise we'll take a little bit of a break after we do the NPV. So what's the NPV of this? So let's go a little bit faster. Why? Because we can. What's the value of this? Minus 1,000. What's the value of the next guy? We already know this. 1,320 divided by 1.1, remember, 10% is the discount rate. And note, now that you know how to do any present values, I'm going a little bit faster. And we just did this. What is the NPV? Now this is a little bit tricky, and I'll do Excel in a second. How much would you do? So this one, how did I get? I took 1,320 and divided by 1 plus R, which was 1,320 divided by 1.1, right? And I got 1,200. Now look, if this is apples, this is oranges, what is this? Bananas. Right? Because it's 1 year has passed. That's you have to. However, the interest rate is very high. So what do I have to do? I have to take this amount, take 1452 divided by 1.1 squared, which turns out to be, I'm going to go sideways here now, 1.21. If you do this, I believe you get 1200 again. I'm set up the problem so that I can get round numbers and so on. So what is the NPV? 2400 minus 1000, right? So 200 was the first period's value creation, and so it's 1400. So let me just make sure I've got this number right, and I believe I have, but I want to do one last thing before we talk about NPV overall. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Excel to generate these numbers. So I'm going to and there's a trick in, unfortunately, there's a little bit of a hassle in doing NPV, which I wanted to introduce also. So let's do this problem. So in cell 1, I'm going to put minus 1000. Please remember it's an A cell, A1, and I'm putting all these numbers in there because eventually when you're doing a more complicated problem, the beauty of Excel is you can put all the numbers in and then you can modify and so on and so forth. What is the next number? The next number is 1320. And remember, I'm doing exactly the same problem that we just did. What is the last number? 1452. So these are the cash flows. You have negative 1000, 1320, 1452. Now what I want you to recognize about NPV is there's a little bit of an issue with it. So I'm going to do NPV and open parenthesis. The first number that jumps out at you is always rate, right? So 0.10. Now here's the thing that already is on the website, a resource saying how to use Excel, which Nate, my great TA, has created for you. And he has highlighted this issue, but I wanted to do it in real time too. You do not want to put the investment there. It is set up to do PV. So the first payment is starting in cell B1, right? So the first payment in the future is 1 year from now. So you'll do B1 colon C1, right? But then you recognize that this is just a PV. So what do you have to do? You have to take account of the NPV part of it. So what I'll do is I'll add A1. Why did I add A1? Because I know if I add A1 and A1 is already negative, which it should be because it's an investment, what do I get? I get 1400. So this allows you to use Excel. The only thing that I would encourage you to remember is Excel NPV is really doing PV of future cash flows. So don't give time zeros information or the first cell information in your cash flows. Of course, please remember how do you get cash flows we'll do next time, but think of these as profits. And the first period, time zero, is an investment. Okay?